Remember what I told you, right?
Yeah.
What?
It's called man business.
By now, the initial shockwaves had settled into something more reflective. The question wasn't just who's ahead. It became, what does this mean long-term? For T.I., the diss records added to his legacy catalog. Regardless of outcome, stepping into the booth reinforced his commitment to lyrical confrontation. His supporters viewed that as integrity. Even critics acknowledged consistency. Tip responded the traditional way. For King, the exposure was undeniable, challenging one of the most infamous trolls in rap guaranteed attention. The gamble amplified his visibility overnight. But visibility cuts both ways. In the industry, relationships matter. Burning bridges with a figure connected across television, film, and music can complicate future collaborations. For 50, the situation reaffirmed his long-standing strategy: outlast and outmaneuver rather than overreact. Throughout his career, he's demonstrated patience in conflict. He often lets opponents exhaust themselves before stepping back in, if he steps back in at all. The generational clash also highlighted how rap beef has evolved. In earlier eras, diss tracks dropped weeks apart. Today, responses happen within hours. Social media compresses timelines, magnifies emotion, and accelerates fatigue. Interestingly, the AI-edited ATL clip symbolized that evolution perfectly. It merged technology, nostalgia, and mockery in one move. It wasn't just a diss, it was commentary on how modern beef operates. Meanwhile, fans continued debating ethics. Was referencing a deceased parent ever justified? Was mocking a skin condition crossing an unforgivable line? Did posting alleged paperwork endanger more than reputations? These weren't simple yes or no questions. They exposed how rap beef now intersects with broader cultural standards. As weeks passed without renewed lyrical escalation from 50, the narrative gradually cooled. Not vanished, cooled. Because unresolved tension lingers in hip-hop like unfinished business. And unfinished business has a way of resurfacing when least expected.
I want to say something about my mama. Your mama. Go dig her up.
Then came the paperwork, the moment that detonated the feud into something far more dangerous. On February 25th, King posted what he labeled humiliating files, alleged federal documents suggesting 50 cooperated with authorities during a past investigation involving a G-Unit affiliate. In hip-hop culture, accusations of informing aren't casual insults. They're existential threats to credibility. The no-snitch code, whether debated or defended, still holds symbolic power. Even the suggestion of cooperation can stain reputations permanently, regardless of evidence. King's caption challenged 50 directly, flipping the earlier rat allegations back at him. It was a dramatic narrative reversal, the accuser now portrayed as the accused. However, there was a major complication. Similar claims had surfaced years earlier and were widely reported as fabricated. Media outlets and legal analysts previously stated there was no verified documentation tying 50 to official cooperation. Despite that, once screenshots hit timelines, nuance disappeared. In the age of virality, perception spreads faster than verification. That's what made the move risky. Even debunked documents can generate doubt when emotionally charged audiences are already divided. And in rap, doubt alone can be weaponized. Supporters framed King's post as poetic justice. Critics labeled it reckless, arguing that circulating questionable paperwork can have real-world consequences beyond internet arguments. The debate expanded beyond this specific feud. Commentators began questioning the culture itself. Why does the snitch narrative carry such disproportionate weight? Why can unverified allegations threaten safety? And who bears responsibility when digital drama intersects with real reputations? Meanwhile, 50's response remained restrained. Instead of directly addressing the paperwork, he pivoted creatively. He deleted feud-related posts and replaced them with a sarcastic message: "You guys hurt my feelings. I'm out of here." On the surface, classic humor. Beneath it, strategy. Because by refusing to dignify the documents with direct engagement, he avoided amplifying them further. Silence, in this case, functioned as damage control. That silence frustrated some observers who expected fireworks. But it also demonstrated experience. In controversies involving legal implications, escalation can be costly. Sometimes not reacting is the loudest statement available. King, however, interpreted the deletion differently. To him, it signaled pressure landing successfully. And that divergence in interpretation, retreat versus repositioning, kept the feud alive.
Go dig her up. Post a picture of your mama. She pay respect. Stop playing with my mama.
Grown man business. When 50 repeated that phrase, it carried layered meaning. On the surface, it dismissed King as inexperienced. Beneath it, it subtly reinforced hierarchy. Age, tenure, legacy. He was essentially saying, this arena belongs to those who built it. For King, that framing likely felt patronizing. Because from his perspective, he wasn't wandering into someone else's arena, he was defending his own household. He didn't care about industry seniority. He cared about respect. The irony is that hip-hop has always celebrated youth challenging veterans. From lyrical upsets to generational shifts, the culture evolves through confrontation. Yet there's also an expectation of apprenticeship, an unwritten rule that newcomers earn stripes gradually. King skipped that gradual climb and went straight at a mogul. Some fans admired the audacity. Others saw recklessness. But regardless of opinion, his willingness to engage a figure of 50's stature signaled confidence, or at least fearlessness. Meanwhile, industry veterans largely avoided taking definitive sides publicly. Neutrality often protects relationships. But subtle alliances appeared. Old rivalries resurfaced quietly. Past grudges found fresh oxygen. The feud became less isolated and more symbolic, a clash between eras. Culturally, the situation also reignited debate around the no-snitch code. When alleged documents resurfaced, even if previously debunked, it reminded people how fragile reputation can be in hip-hop. An accusation can trend faster than correction. And in a digital age, screenshots outlive clarifications. For 50, ignoring that paperwork strategically avoided giving it oxygen. Addressing it directly might have validated it. Silence kept it in the realm of internet chatter rather than official dispute. For King, posting it signaled willingness to escalate beyond lyrical sparring. It was high risk, high reward. But risky moves don't always yield intended outcomes. Sometimes they complicate narratives instead of clarifying them. As Part 12 closes, what stands out most is not who won, but how differently each side defined victory. For King, victory may have meant showing he won't be bullied. For 50, victory may have meant refusing to be baited. Two definitions. One culture watching. And hip-hop rarely forgets moments like this.
I'm not going back my mama. I'm not going. So tell your mama dig her ass up and post a picture that look better than my mama.
King Harris's reaction wasn't measured. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't filtered through publicists or brand managers. It was instinct. The sound of a young man watching a mogul disrespect his mother in front of millions. And that instinct came out loud. When he went live, there was no industry polish in his words. No calculated media training. Just anger sharpened by loyalty. In that moment, King wasn't thinking about how 50 built an empire through G-Unit dominance or television deals. He wasn't thinking about legacy comparisons between his father and Curtis Jackson. He was thinking about his mother being publicly mocked. The generational dynamic made it even more explosive. Here was a hip-hop veteran in his late 40s clashing with someone barely old enough to legally drink in many states. The power imbalance was obvious, financially, culturally, institutionally. But emotionally, King wasn't intimidated. If anything, he seemed fueled by the disparity. His message wasn't subtle. Plaques and business ventures don't give anyone a pass to disrespect family. Social media amplified every word. Clips from his live circulated within minutes across blogs, fan pages, and reaction channels. Supporters praised his loyalty, framing it as admirable, a son defending his household against someone perceived as bullying. Critics warned he was playing with fire, poking a figure who built his reputation on destroying opponents digitally and strategically. But King didn't back down. He doubled down. Instead of cooling off, he escalated. The anger transformed into action, not just words. This wasn't a quick outburst that fades by sunrise. This was a declaration. He wasn't stepping aside simply because the opponent was powerful. In fact, the imbalance almost justified the retaliation in his mind. The cultural divide became obvious. One side argued that 50 initiated the family angle by posting about Tiny and mocking King's condition. The other side insisted that regardless of provocation, certain lines, particularly involving deceased parents, should remain sacred. The debate wasn't just about two families anymore. It was about hip-hop ethics. What makes this stage of the feud significant is the emotional transparency. In older rap beefs, personal attacks were often layered inside metaphors and punchlines. Here, everything was direct. Public. Immediate. No studio needed. Just Wi-Fi and a phone camera. And that shift reflects the modern battlefield. Rap beef no longer waits for diss tracks alone. Instagram Live is now the opening round. Tweets are warning shots. Stories are grenades. By the time music drops, the narrative is already formed. King Harris made it clear he wasn't participating in internet trolling. He was defending blood. And whether that approach was wise or reckless depended entirely on which side of the cultural fence you stood on. But one thing was undeniable. The situation had moved beyond competitive sparring. This was personal now. And personal beefs rarely resolve cleanly.
So we gonna troll straight like that. Your son don't love you. You don't got no family.
Grown man business. Those 3 words ultimately summarized 50's public stance. It wasn't just dismissal, it was framing. In that framing, King was portrayed as emotional, impulsive, and inexperienced. Meanwhile, 50 positioned himself as seasoned, detached, and above the fray. That narrative resonated with a segment of the culture that values composure over reaction. They argued that veterans shouldn't be baited into escalating every provocation, especially when legal insinuations and family trauma are involved. However, another segment saw it differently. They believed indifference was convenient. That avoiding direct lyrical response allowed 50 to sidestep accountability for targeting Tiny and mocking King initially. The broader reaction across hip-hop reflected old alliances resurfacing. Rick Ross, longtime rival of 50, publicly supported King, proving that decade-old grudges still simmer beneath the surface. Other figures offered neutral commentary, emphasizing how quickly rap beef can spiral in the social media era. Even law enforcement reportedly addressed concerned calls from fans worried about escalation, a surreal reminder that digital feuds can bleed into real-world anxiety. Meanwhile, the alleged paperwork continued circulating despite prior debunking. It highlighted a deeper issue. In a culture where reputation equals survival, accusations can be as powerful as evidence. As things stand, no apologies have been issued. No formal reconciliation announced. T.I. has multiple diss tracks documented. King has publicly stated he isn't finished. 50's camp remains largely quiet, relying on subtle messaging rather than aggressive retaliation. And that silence may be the most calculated move of all. Because in hip-hop, recognition is currency. Attention fuels momentum. By treating the offensive as minor, by leaning into parody instead of rage, 50 potentially denied King the one thing he was chasing most, acknowledgement as a legitimate threat. Whether that strategy ends the conflict or simply pauses it remains unclear. But one truth stands firm. In modern rap warfare, the loudest move isn't always a diss track. Sometimes it's indifference.
That just because he share the same blood as you. I don't give because man, at the end of the day.
If there's one thing this entire saga exposed, it's how differently 2 generations interpret power. For 50 Cent, power has always meant control of narrative. Since the early 2000s, he mastered the art of psychological warfare, humiliating opponents, reframing conflicts as jokes, and making rivals look emotional while he looked calculated. That formula helped him survive battles with major industry names and transition from rap dominance into television and business empires. But for King Harris, power looked different. It wasn't about strategic silence or meme precision. It was about visible loyalty, immediate defense, public protection of family honor. In his worldview, failing to respond loudly would signal weakness, not wisdom. And that philosophical difference made compromise almost impossible. As the days passed without a traditional diss track from 50, conversation shifted. Analysts began asking whether this was maturity or manipulation. Was 50 refusing to validate a younger opponent by engaging directly? Or was he avoiding lyrical territory where the conflict could escalate further? Meanwhile, T.I. continued releasing music, reinforcing that he still viewed the situation as a competitive rap dispute. For Tip, stepping into the booth wasn't optional, it was mandatory. His legacy was built on bar-for-bar credibility. If someone questioned that, response had to be musical. King, on the other hand, balanced between emotional statements and strategic provocation. Each time the timeline quieted, he reignited conversation with commentary, clips, or renewed references to earlier allegations. His approach reflected a younger generation's understanding of virality. Momentum must be sustained. The contrast became fascinating. 50 slowed tempo. King accelerated it. 50 minimized. King magnified. 50 joked. King confronted. Observers began noticing something subtle. Without equal retaliation, public fatigue can set in. Rap beef thrives on exchange. When only one side fires consistently, attention eventually redistributes elsewhere. By refusing to match output with output, 50 potentially forced the spotlight to cool. Still, pride is powerful. And hip-hop history shows that unfinished tension rarely evaporates completely. It simmers. This phase of the feud became less about what was said and more about what wasn't. The absence of escalation from 50's side created ambiguity. Ambiguity invites speculation. And speculation keeps narratives alive long after direct attacks fade. In the end, Part 11 isn't about bars or paperwork. It's about philosophy. 2 generations clashing not just over insults, but over definitions of strength. And in hip-hop, perception of strength can outlast any diss track.
You rich, but you not loved. Money means nothing without no one to spend it with. Your son don't love you.
Grown man business. For simple words. That's all 50 Cent needed to cool down what had turned into a full-scale family offensive. Diss tracks, resurfaced federal paperwork, gravesite videos, meme warfare, all of it seemingly brushed aside with a sarcastic caption and a smirk. But before that silence settled in, before the posts vanished and the timeline got scrubbed clean, King Harris had already dragged the conflict somewhere deeply personal. And that's the part people can't stop dissecting. What started as industry chatter in early February 2026 quickly escalated into one of the most volatile rap feuds in recent memory. The spark? T.I. appearing on Nightcap with Shannon Sharpe, publicly accusing 50 of backing out of a proposed Versus-style battle after initially agreeing behind closed doors. According to Tip, conversations were positive in private. There was mutual respect, real dialogue, even excitement around the potential cultural moment. But once the idea became public, 50 allegedly ghosted the concept. That public reversal didn't just bruise egos, it raised questions about credibility. For someone like T.I., whose career has always been rooted in pride and public perception, that felt like a calculated slight. He framed it as avoidance, even fear. Not fear of violence, but fear of comparison, fear that a side-by-side catalog breakdown would reveal uncomfortable truths about legacy depth. And whether fans agreed or not, that narrative stuck long enough to ignite tension. Between February 7th and February 21st, the tension simmered online. 50 responded the way he always has, through indirect mockery. Old allegations were reposted. Memes resurfaced. Subtle captions carried heavy implications. Among them, insinuations labeling T.I. a rat, one of the most inflammatory accusations in hip-hop culture. In a genre where street credibility still underpins artistic authenticity, that word isn't tossed around lightly. It attacks foundation, not just reputation. T.I. pushed back publicly, denying the narrative and framing 50's tactics as digital trolling rather than real confrontation. By February 22nd, the situation escalated dramatically. 50 targeted Tamika "Tiny" Harris, T.I.'s wife, with a disrespectful post captioned, "Keep my name out your mouth." He then mocked King Harris directly, referencing his appearance and vitiligo, a skin condition that should never be ammunition in lyrical warfare. That moment changed everything. The unwritten rule of keeping family out of rap beef? Shattered. What was once a competitive clash of legacies became personal demolition. And King Harris, just 21 years old, responded not as an industry figure, but as a son. His Instagram live reaction was raw, emotional, unfiltered. You could hear it in his tone. This wasn't about streams anymore. It wasn't about a Versus battle. It was about bloodlines. The fuse was officially lit. And the culture leaned in to watch the explosion.
What's up, man? Ain't heard from you in a while, where you been?
At this stage, the feud transformed into a case study. Not just about ego, but about strategy. On one side, aggression, visibility, and relentless output. On the other, patience, satire, and selective engagement. Historically, 50 built his reputation during the G-Unit era by overwhelming opponents musically and psychologically. But in 2026, his approach looked more corporate than combative. Protect the brand. Limit liability. Avoid unnecessary escalation. That shift reflects growth or evolution, depending on perspective. A younger 50 might have flooded the market with diss tracks. A seasoned mogul understands legal optics, business implications, and long-term positioning. King, conversely, operated without those constraints. Youth often moves faster because it carries less baggage. Less to protect. Less to lose. The result was asymmetry. One fighter swinging, the other calculating. Observers also noticed something else. Without reciprocal hostility, outrage struggles to sustain itself. Social media thrives on reaction loops. When one side refuses to feed the loop, engagement slowly disperses. That may have been the quiet brilliance behind Grown Man Business. It reframed the feud as a mismatch rather than a rivalry. But pride is unpredictable. And hip-hop history shows that even calculated silence can crack under the right provocation. For now, though, the battlefield quieted. Not because wounds healed, but because momentum shifted.
Well, I'm gonna straighten everything out as soon as I get that money.
Remember what I told you, right?
After the emotional volleys, King shifted tactics. Instead of only firing personal shots, he aimed at something more psychological, something he believed would land deeper than insults. He targeted perception. Not wealth. Not music sales. Not television success. But fatherhood. For years, the strained relationship between 50 Cent and his eldest son has been public knowledge. Their disagreements have played out online and in interviews, creating an uncomfortable narrative that wealth doesn't always guarantee harmony at home. King leaned directly into that narrative. His implication wasn't subtle. You can dominate charts and boardrooms, but if your own son stands distant, what does that really mean? It was a calculated shift. Rather than mocking business moves or streaming numbers, King attacked emotional credibility. That angle hit differently because it wasn't about competition. It was about legacy beyond rap. In hip-hop culture, fatherhood carries symbolic weight, especially for men who built their personas around resilience and control. This move reframed the entire battle. Now it wasn't just veteran versus newcomer. It was family values versus personal history. And because 50 has openly joked about his strained paternal dynamic in the past, King's words reopened conversations many thought had cooled. The audience reaction was intense. Some saw it as fair game after Sabrina Jackson's name was invoked. Others saw it as unnecessarily cruel. Either way, the temperature rose again. When personal wounds get reopened in public, especially ones involving children and parents, the line between entertainment and real-life hurt blurs fast. King's supporters praised the boldness. They argued that if 50 could troll everyone else's family situations for years, he shouldn't be exempt when someone highlights his own. Critics warned that this approach risked burning bridges beyond repair. Industry relationships are delicate. Public humiliation tends to linger. Yet King's message remained consistent: family is sacred. If you attack mine, I won't hesitate to spotlight yours. He framed it as accountability rather than cruelty. Meanwhile, 50's relative quiet during this stretch added mystery. For someone who built an empire off immediate digital retaliation, the pause felt strategic. Was he preparing a bigger move? Was he letting King exhaust himself? Or was he genuinely recalibrating? The chessboard felt reset. Each side had now hit deeply personal zones. And because those zones involve real human relationships, mothers, sons, spouses, the consequences extend far beyond rap bars. By the time this phase ended, it was clear the beef had evolved past simple ego. It was layered with generational tension, emotional vulnerability, and public scrutiny. The next move would determine whether this stayed lyrical warfare or escalated into something far more damaging.
Nah, I'm cool. Yeah, I'm cool. It's just taking me a minute, that's all.
When King said, "I'm not raised like that," it wasn't just a defensive statement, it was a declaration of identity. In his mind, staying silent would have been betrayal. He wasn't speaking as an artist chasing clout. He was speaking as a son defending his mother, Tamika Tiny Harris, and by extension the Harris family name. To him, respect wasn't negotiable. It didn't bend for platinum plaques, Hollywood credits, or streaming milestones. That line created a clear divide between generational codes. On one side stood 50 Cent, a veteran who built a career weaponizing humor, sarcasm, and psychological trolling. On the other side stood a 21-year-old raised in a household where reputation and loyalty are currency. King framed his reaction not as impulsive but as principled. In his world, letting someone mock your mother publicly without consequence would mean forfeiting dignity. Observers began analyzing not just what was said, but what it represented. Hip-hop has always been rooted in bravado, competition, and coded aggression. But there's historically been an unwritten boundary around family. Once 50 posted about Tiny and mocked King's vitiligo, many felt that boundary had been crossed first. That perception gave King moral justification in the eyes of his supporters. However, critics argued that escalation only deepened the damage. They questioned whether responding emotionally played directly into 50's strengths. Curtis Jackson has thrived for decades in chaos. He understands attention cycles. He knows controversy equals visibility. By reacting loudly, was King inadvertently feeding the machine? Still, King appeared unconcerned with optics. His focus was immediate and personal. And that emotional clarity resonated with a portion of the culture that values authenticity over strategy. In interviews and lives, he doubled down on the idea that legacy means nothing if you can't protect your household. The tension during this stage wasn't just about insults. It was about worldview. One side leaned into calculated mockery. The other leaned into instinctual defense. Neither side appeared willing to retreat. As commentary videos multiplied and timelines filled with split opinions, the conflict evolved beyond individuals. It became a referendum on modern rap beef ethics. Is trolling still just trolling once family enters the picture? Is retaliation justified if provoked? And who decides where that line actually sits? By the end of this phase, the emotional temperature hadn't cooled, it intensified. Because once someone publicly commits to defending their family, by any means, stepping back becomes harder. Pride locks you in. And with pride now fully engaged, the next move wasn't going to be a tweet. It was going to be something permanent. Something recorded. Something that lives beyond disappearing stories. The booth was calling.
One of them. That's on my soul. I don't give a how y'all think I'm living. I don't give a how y'all think.
By the time both sides stepped into the booth, the war officially graduated from social media chaos to permanent record. In hip-hop, once a diss track hits streaming platforms, it stops being temporary drama and becomes history. Stories disappear. Tweets get deleted. But songs live forever in algorithms, playlists, and search results. And both T.I. and his sons understood that math perfectly. T.I. fired first musically, releasing a diss record that framed the conflict as larger than personal insults. His tone wasn't playful, it was confrontational. He questioned 50's authenticity, accused him of hiding behind memes, and challenged him to respond in the only arena that truly counts in rap, the booth. For Tip, this wasn't about Instagram captions. It was about bars. Right behind him, King followed up with his own track. The production wasn't rushed or thrown together for clicks. It was mixed, mastered, structured, meant to circulate. In it, he referenced past rivalries involving 50, alluding to moments where critics claimed he lost lyrical battles. He painted 50 as someone more comfortable trolling than trading versus face-to-face. The father-son tag team dynamic added spectacle. This wasn't just a one-on-one duel anymore. It felt like a coordinated offensive. And when Demony Harris, T.I.'s other son, entered the mix with his own diss sampling Outkast's Miss Jackson, the symbolism became unmistakable. The Harris family wasn't responding individually, they were mobilizing collectively. That collective energy made the situation feel layered. Loyalty wasn't theoretical anymore. It was audible. And once music entered the equation, fans had tangible material to debate. Who had better punchlines? Who sounded more composed? Who seemed emotional versus calculated? Meanwhile, the broader culture watched closely. Because rap beef has always been measured by lyrical execution. Memes might spark interest, but bars determine legacy. And for the first time in this conflict, the spotlight shifted squarely onto 50's next move. Would he respond with a track? Or continue operating from a distance? As diss tracks stacked up within days, the intensity didn't plateau, it climbed. Each new release added context, amplified accusations, and solidified alliances. What began as a versus dispute now had 4 or 5 songs attached to it, each escalating rhetoric. This stage proved something crucial. The younger generation isn't afraid to challenge veterans directly. Whether strategically wise or not, King showed he was willing to step into the same arena as someone who built dominance during the G-Unit era. And once bars are exchanged, ego becomes cemented. Because backing down after recorded shots feels like surrender. The battlefield wasn't virtual anymore. It was archived. The only question left was whether 50 would enter it on equal footing or change the game entirely.